Imagine standing right there, seeing the Statue of Liberty for the very first time.
That must have been an incredible sight.
Absolutely. For millions, like 13-year-old Sadie Frown coming from Poland, that big woman with spikes on her head, as she called it, well, it symbolized this whole new world. Freedom, opportunity.
But the reality was often quite different, wasn't it?
Sadie lost her mother, ended up in the factories in New York. A tough start. And that's kind of what we're diving into today.
Right, the growing pains of urbanization in America, roughly 1870 to 1900.
Yeah, a period where the land of opportunity idea met some harsh realities. Cities just exploded.
And with that came huge challenges. Language barriers, class divides, race, ethnicity.
Leading to low wages, awful overcrowding, poor sanitation, disease. It sounds pretty grim.
It could be. But it was also a time of incredible transformation.
So our mission for this deep dive, unpack that rapid city growth. Who was coming to these cities and why? What were the immediate problems?
And crucially, how did people respond? Different classes, reformers, artists, thinkers.
Right. So get ready. We're stepping back into the birth of the modern American city, bustling, chaotic, and totally transformative.
Let's do it.
So it feels like American cities just exploded during this time. What was the secret sauce, the underlying engine driving that kind of growth in the late 19th century? It wasn't just a gradual shift, was it?
No, not gradual at all. It truly was a supercharged period. What's crucial to understand is how a confluence of factors, industrialization and new technologies, fundamentally reshaped everything.
Industrialization, needing workers, obviously.
Massive numbers of workers.
Right.
And new tech meant factories weren't tied to rivers anymore. They could be in the cities running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
24/7, wow. That must have completely changed the rhythm of life itself.
Totally. A seismic shift.
And it wasn't just industrial might, right? There were specific inventions that popped up, really changing the face and function of cities. What were these game changers?
You can point to 4 innovations that were utterly critical. First, electric lighting.
Edison's light bulb.
Edison patented the incandescent bulb in '79, yeah. Then the first commercial power plants in '82. And importantly, Nikola Tesla's AC system let power travel for miles.
So it wasn't just about lighting factories.
No, that was huge for continuous production, but it also lit up city streets. Economic activity, social life, it could all just keep going long after sunset. Imagine the difference compared to small towns that just went dark.
A profound shift in daily life, definitely. No more relying solely on gas lamps or moonlight. Okay, so that's lighting. What else connected these expanding urban spaces?
Next up, communications improvements, specifically the telephone.
Patented in 1876.
Correct. And it rapidly started to push the telegraph aside. By 1900, think about this, over 1.5 million telephones were in use.
Wow, instant communication.
Which increased business demand, sped up production, which then required even more workers. It fueled growth and urban sprawl.
Okay, so cities are lit up 24/7, they're connected instantly. But as they sprawled, I imagine just getting around became a nightmare.
Oh, a massive challenge, a huge bottleneck. We moved from, horse-drawn omnibuses and horse cars.
Which must have been messy.
Unbelievably messy and slow. Think about the sheer amount of manure on the streets. It was a sanitation crisis in itself. So then came Frank Sprague's electric trolley in 1887. That started modernizing transport in cities like Richmond.
Faster, cleaner.
Relatively, yes. But streets were still packed. So to escape that, cities built elevated trains, the L trains. New York got them first, then Boston, Chicago.
Going above the fray.
Right. And then as cities also started to stretch skyward, transportation also went underground, subways. Boston pioneered that in 1897.
Speaking of stretching skyward, that brings us nicely to the rise of skyscrapers. Cities like New York, Manhattan especially, they couldn't just grow outward forever.
Fixed boundaries. Plus, real estate costs were skyrocketing.
Yeah.
And frankly, prestige played a role. Companies wanted landmark buildings.
So they had to go up.
They had to go up. Chicago's 10-story home insurance building in 1885 is often called the first skyscraper.
But 10 stories doesn't sound that massive now.
No, but it was then. But the real key was Elisha Otis's electric elevator in 1889. That's what truly launched the skyscraper craze.
Ah, because you could actually get to the upper floors easily.
Precisely. Suddenly, these towering structures became practical, even desirable, especially in those crowded eastern cities that literally reshaped the skyline and the density of American cities.
It's so easy to look at these inventions, lights, phones, trolleys, elevators, and just see efficiency gains. But what's really profound, like you said, is how they didn't just change the city, they created a whole new kind of urban reality.
Completely. The pace of life, the scale, the possibilities, all transformed. Imagine the psychological shift when the rhythm of life suddenly went 24/7. That was entirely alien to previous generations.
So these bustling, lit-up, ever-expanding cities needed people to power them, lots of people. And the faces showing up weren't just the usual suspects from earlier migrations, were they?
No, you're right. The cities were populated by incredibly diverse new arrivals. We see primarily two groups emerging as major factors in a way they hadn't been before in urbanization.
Okay, who were they?
First, African Americans fleeing the violence and lack of opportunity in the rural South. And second, a huge wave of new European immigrants, particularly from Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe.
Right, this influx dramatically changed the social and cultural fabric.
Absolutely.
Let's start with the African American migration, often called the Great Migration, though this is sort of the first wave of it. What were the compelling forces, both push and pull, drawing people from the rural South?
Well, the push factors were brutal. Despite the Civil War being over, racial hatred was intense. You had the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, constant violence. Estimates suggest around 3,500 racially motivated lynchings and murders just between 1865 and 1900 in the South.
A terrifying environment to live in.
Truly.
Yeah.
So that's the push. The pull factors were the promise, at least, of life in northern cities. Job opportunities that paid actual wages, however low.
Compared to sharecropping.
Also, the chance to vote, maybe a bit more freely than in the South, and better educational opportunities for children. Some factory owners even actively recruited or assisted migration because they wanted cheap labor.
So people head north seeking this better life. Was it truly the promised land they hoped for, or did new challenges just emerge in a different setting?
The reality was incredibly tough still. They were very often relegated to the lowest paying, unskilled jobs. Steel mills, mines, construction, maybe working as porters or domestic servants.
So still facing economic hardship.
Definitely. And while the wages might have been technically higher than back south, the cost of living in these big cities was also much higher. So you often ended up in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions, not that different from the tenement slums immigrants were in.
And racial discrimination didn't just disappear at the Mason-Dixon line, did it?
Not at all. Practices like redlining, refusing loans or insurance in certain neighborhoods, and restrictive covenants and housing deeds actively concentrated African Americans into the absolute worst slum areas. Segregation was very real.
But despite the economic struggles and the ongoing discrimination, were there other kinds of gains, non-economic ones perhaps, a different kind of freedom?
You're absolutely right to ask that. The psychological gains could be significant. Educational opportunities, as I mentioned, were generally enforced more rigorously in the North for both black and white children.
That's important for the next generation.
Hugely important.
Yeah.
And crucially, there was a degree of anonymity in a large northern city that just didn't exist in the South. It offered a measure of personal freedom, freedom to move, to work, maybe even to speak your mind a bit more without constantly having to defer to every white person you encountered.
A release from that constant oppressive deference demanded in the Jim Crow South.
Exactly. That was a profound personal shift for many.
Okay, now let's turn to the European immigrants. You mentioned a really significant demographic shift in the nature of immigration during this time, right? How was this wave different?
It was a critical shift, yes. Starting mainly in the 1880s, the flow from Northern and Western Europe, places like Germany, Ireland, Britain, Scandinavia, that flow remained pretty constant. But what you see is this rapid increase in arrivals from Southern and Eastern Europe.
So countries like
Italy, Russia, Poland, Hungary, Greece, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a whole different mix.
And how are they different from the earlier waves?
Well, unlike many of their predecessors, these new immigrants often arrived with very little money, sometimes none, and often without much formal education or specific skills. They tended to settle right there in the port cities where they landed, like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, rather than having the means to move west and buy land like some earlier groups did.
So they're adding directly to the density and challenges of the big East Coast cities.
Directly. By 1890, get this, over 80% of New York City's population was either foreign-born or had foreign-born parents.
80%. That's staggering. It completely changes the character of the city.
Utterly. And Ellis Island becomes the symbol of this.
Right. Opened in 1892. The main gateway.
The official port of entry. Millions passed through. Doctors did quick inspections, mostly looking for infectious diseases like trachoma or tuberculosis. Only about 2% were actually denied entry, despite the myths.
Still, must have been an intimidating process.
And once through, seeking comfort and familiarity, people naturally gravitated towards others from their home country. They formed these tight-knit ethnic enclaves.
Little Italy, Chinatown. Those started then.
Places like that provided a vital sense of community, shared language, food, customs. But they also, unfortunately, added to the extreme congestion in the poorest slum neighborhoods, the tenements.
Okay, so you have this incredible new diversity, which was essential fuel for the city's growth engine, but it also became a breeding ground for prejudice, didn't it? These new faces, new languages, new customs, they became convenient targets.
It's a pattern we see again and again. The Dillingham Commission, a congressional study later on, actually confirmed that these newer immigrants looked and acted differently.
Oh, so?
Often darker skin complexion compared to Northern Europeans, unfamiliar languages, different religions. Many were Catholic or Jewish, whereas the U.S. was predominantly Protestant. These easily identifiable differences made them easy scapegoats for all the city's problems: crime, poverty, disease.
So a backlash develops.
A significant backlash. You had influential figures like Reverend Josiah Strong writing bestsellers like Our Country, explicitly identifying Southern and Eastern Europeans, along with Catholics and Jews, as a fundamental threat to America's moral fiber.
Wow. Blatant nativism.
Blatant. And this fueled anti-immigration groups like the American Protective Association.
Right.
They lobbied hard and eventually successfully for things like an English language literacy test for immigrants, which finally passed in 1917. It really laid the groundwork for the much stricter quota acts that came in the 1920s.
So, okay, cities are these cauldrons growing, dynamic, full of energy, but also chaotic, overcrowded, unequal, and often prejudiced. With all this rapid change swirling around, people couldn't just stand by. How did city dwellers, from the working poor to the upper crust, and also these dedicated reformers, how did they start to navigate this new urban reality? How did they cope or try to improve things?
Yeah, life in the city was overwhelming for so many. And the ways people sought relief or tried to make things better were just as diverse as the city dwellers themselves. You see solutions popping up that were often quite class-specific, but also these broader reform efforts that aim to improve conditions more generally.
Okay, let's break that down. Maybe start with the working class. They often didn't have many formal avenues for help, right? So what filled that gap? How did they get by?
Well, for many working-class urbanites, especially the new immigrants, something called machine politics provided very practical, if sometimes, let's say, ethically dubious relief.
The political machines, like Tammany Hall in New York.
Tammany Hall, under boss William Tweed, is the classic example, yes. The system basically worked like this. A citizen, maybe an immigrant family, had a problem. The road on their street was a muddy mess, garbage wasn't being collected, they needed a job, maybe some coal in the winter.
Real everyday problems.
They'd go see their local alderman, who was part of the machine. And the machine, because it controls city contracts and jobs, could often find a speedy solution. Get the road paved, get the trash picked up, find someone a low-level city job.
Okay, that sounds helpful, actually.
It was helpful in a direct way, but the price was loyalty. In exchange for these favors, the machine expected votes, often multiple votes, if they could manage it, and the system was lubricated by graft.
Meaning corruption.
Meaning corruption. Kickbacks on city contracts, bribes, skimming money.
Yeah. All
flowing up to the boss. So yeah, it was corrupt through and through, but for many people struggling day to day, it delivered tangible benefits much faster than any slow-moving, impersonal city bureaucracy ever would.
That's a fascinating tension. Practical help versus systemic corruption. What else provided relief for the working class? Just getting away from the grind.
Absolutely. Entertainment was huge, an essential escape. You see the rise of amusement parks like Coney Island, opening in 1895. Wild rides, strange attractions, stage shows, cheap thrills for the masses.
A totally new kind of leisure.
Totally new. And vaudeville. These large variety shows with singers, dancers, comedians, magicians. Harry Houdini got his start in vaudeville. They were hugely popular, drawing diverse crowds.
Something for everyone.
Pretty much. And then the Nickelodeon, basically the forerunner to movie theaters. They started popping up first in Pittsburgh in 1905, showing short films for a nickel. By 1910, they were evolving into proper cinemas.
And sports, too.
Oh, definitely. Professional baseball really took off as a major spectator sport. The first pro team, the Cincinnati Red Stockings, dates back to 1869. New ballparks were being built, like Fenway Park in Boston later on. Baseball was relatively inexpensive, a great way to spend an afternoon, and it fostered this unique, unified civic identity. People from all different backgrounds cheering for the same home team.
A powerful unifier in diverse cities. Okay, so that's the working class. What about the upper class? They weren't exactly riding the trolley out to Coney Island, I imagine?
No, not typically. Their relief looked quite different. They often chose to live and work right in the heart of the city, the business core, but they insulated themselves with layers of comfort and luxury.
How so?
They sought out what they considered refined pastimes. Attending classical music concerts, Andrew Carnegie famously built Carnegie Hall in 1891 for this purpose. Visiting fine art collections, the Metropolitan Museum of Art opened its doors in 1872.
Establishing cultural institutions.
And participating in exclusive social gatherings, balls, private clubs. For the newly wealthy, getting listed in the annual social register, started by Louis Keller in 1886, was crucial. It was basically a directory of approved socialites, confirming your elevated status.
Keeping track of who was in. And then there's the group in the middle, the growing middle class, the managers, doctors, lawyers, engineers. How'd they find relief or carve out their space?
For them, two key strategies emerged: education and suburbanization.
Ah, the move to the suburbs. That starts here.
It really gains momentum here. As transportation improved those trolleys, eventually trains the middle class found they could work in the increasingly chaotic city center, but escape each evening to quieter, cleaner, more spacious homes in the suburbs.
Creating that commuter lifestyle.
And it quickly fostered this perception that living farther away from the city core signified greater affluence, a better quality of life.
Interesting. And education was the other pillar.
Yes. Education was seen as vital for securing their children's position in the middle class. Public school enrollment absolutely soared, tripling between 1870 and 1920. The number of high schools went from just about 100 to over 6,000.
Incredible growth.
And higher education expanded too. The Morrill Acts of 1862 and 1890 helped create affordable land-grant colleges. Think Iowa State, Purdue specifically catering to practical professional careers in agriculture and mechanics, perfect for the middle class.
Now, what about middle-class women during this time?
Well, many middle-class women still focus primarily on homemaking. You see the rise of magazines like Ladies' Home Journal and Good Housekeeping catering to that. But significantly, higher education started opening up for women too. Elite women's colleges like Mount Holyoke, Vassar, Smith, Wellesley were founded between 1865 and 1880.
Providing new opportunities beyond the home.
New opportunities, yes. Primarily in fields then considered suitable for women, like teaching, maybe becoming professors, or entering the growing field of social work.
Okay, so we have these class-specific ways of coping and finding relief. But beyond that, there were also broader reform movements trying to tackle the systemic problems of the cities, right? Aiming to improve life for everyone, or at least the less fortunate.
Yes, absolutely. Several important movements emerged. One was the social gospel movement.
Driven by religious figures.
Yes, led by progressive ministers like Reverend Washington Gladden. They argued that churches couldn't just save souls. They had a moral obligation to address the terrible secular conditions people faced. So churches started offering practical help, hygiene classes, gymnasiums for recreation, reading rooms, and libraries. Organizations like the Salvation Army and the YMCA also dramatically expanded their services in cities during this time.
Addressing both spiritual and physical needs.
Then, building on that, you had the settlement house movement, which was really pioneered by women.
Jane Addams and Hull House in Chicago are the famous examples.
The most famous, yes. Addams opened Hull House in 1889. Lillian Wald started the Henry Street Settlement in New York around 1895. These settlement houses were located right in the heart of poor immigrant neighborhoods.
What do they actually do?
They offered a whole range of vital services. Child daycare so mothers could work, evening classes in English or vocational skills, health clinics providing free or low-cost health care, playgrounds for children, basically trying to meet the immediate needs of the working poor, especially women and children.
But it wasn't just charity, was it? They became advocates too.
Critically important point. They didn't just provide services. They used their firsthand knowledge of the conditions to lobby for political change. Figures like Florence Kelley, who worked with Addams, became fierce advocates for housing laws, child labor laws, workers' compensation regulations. They were really at the forefront of progressive-era reforms.
Making a tangible difference through both direct aid and political action. Okay, and one more movement you mentioned.
The City Beautiful movement. This is more focused on the physical environment of the city.
trying to make cities look better.
Look better, feel better, function better. It was championed by architects and landscape designers like Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park earlier, and Daniel Burnham. Their big showcase was the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago.
The famous White City.
It presented this idealized vision of perfect urban planning, grand, orderly, beautiful buildings, lagoons, green spaces. The movement had three main tenets: create larger park areas within cities, build wider boulevards lined with trees and greenery, and encourage the expansion of suburbs.
So the idea was that improving the aesthetics and providing green space would improve the quality of life for all city dwellers.
That was the hope, yes, to bring a sense of order, beauty, and nature into the often chaotic urban environment. Burnham's later comprehensive plan for Chicago really embodied these ideals.
So with all this massive change, the technology, the migration, the social stratification, the reform efforts, it must have been a lot for people to process. How did the thinkers, the writers, the artists of the day make sense of this new America, and maybe even try to shape its future?
That's a truly profound question, isn't it? How do we make sense of a world that's transforming so radically right before our eyes? Many people did turn to art, to philosophy, to literature to try and provide some kind of lens, some understanding, often grappling with the really stark realities they saw.
Did some offer easy answers?
Well, some theories offered what seemed like easy answers, though maybe they were overly simplistic. You had the rise of social Darwinism,
Applying Darwin's evolution to society.
taking Charles Darwin's biological theories and kind of twisting them. Herbert Spencer in England coined the phrase survival of the fittest, and American thinkers like William Graham Sumner applied it directly to society. They basically argued that success, wealth, power was simply due to inherent traits, better adaptability. The rich were rich because they were naturally fitter.
A convenient justification for inequality in the Gilded Age.
Extremely convenient. It suggested government shouldn't interfere, shouldn't help the poor, because that would just impede natural processes. Of course, critics immediately pointed out that the playing field was anything but level.
Right. So if social Darwinism offered this rather cold justification, were there other thinkers who looked at the changing world and proposed different ways to understand or improve it, maybe using science and reason differently?
Yes. Others took ideas about change and adaptation in a more nuanced, maybe more optimistic direction. Thinkers like William James championed pragmatism.
What's the core idea there?
Pragmatism basically argued that Americans needed to be practical, to experiment with ideas. Truth wasn't some fixed, abstract thing. You found truth by testing ideas, seeing if they actually worked in the real world, tying concepts to actual objects and occurrences, rather than just relying on old assumptions or traditions.
More experimental, less dogmatic.
And John Dewey, a student of James, built on this with his philosophy of instrumentalism. He strongly advocated for education and the scientific method, not just as ways to understand the world, but as the best tools for actively reforming and improving society. It was a much more hopeful, action-oriented philosophy focused on problem solving.
Okay, so philosophy is trying to grapple with this. How did artists and writers capture this new reality, this focus on the real world? They must have felt compelled to document what they were seeing all around them.
Oh, absolutely. There was a strong move towards realism in the arts. They sought to portray real life, often focusing on the grittier aspects of this new urban industrial world.
Like Jacob Riis.
Jacob Riis is a prime example in photography. His book, How the Other Half Lives, published in 1890, used these incredibly powerful, stark photographs to document the absolutely squalid conditions in New York's tenement slums. It shocked the public conscience and directly led to some of the first significant tenement reforms.
So art directly driving social change. What about painting?
In visual arts, you had the Ashcan School of Art emerge. Artists like George Bellows, John Sloan, Edward Hopper, they turned away from idealized landscapes or portraits of the wealthy. Instead, they focused on depicting everyday urban life, especially working-class life, the bustling streets, the crowded tenements, people in bars, at boxing matches, just capturing the energy and often the grime, realistically.
Yeah, I mean literature.
Literature saw a similar turn. Novelists like Stephen Crane wrote incredibly stark, realistic stories about slum life, like Maggie, a girl of the streets. Rebecca Harding Davis published Life in the Iron Mills much earlier, exposing the harsh realities of industrial labor. Mark Twain, of course, is famous for realism in books like The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but he also directly critiqued the era's corruption and materialism in The Gilded Age, the book that gave the era its name.
And some writers took realism even further, didn't they? Into naturalism.
Right. Writers like Jack London embraced naturalism. This often focused on how individuals were shaped, even controlled, by forces beyond their control: heredity, environment, the raw laws of nature. Think of his famous novel, The Call of the Wild. Humanity seen as part of a larger, often indifferent, natural world.
It's incredible thinking about it, how some authors really used this realism to give voice to segments of society that were often overlooked or stereotyped or just completely misrepresented.
That's a crucial point. Kate Chopin, for instance, was a foremost woman short story writer of the time. She wrote with unflinching realism about women's inner lives, their struggles, their desires within the constraints society placed on them. She even openly addressed taboo subjects like miscegenation in works like Desiree's Baby, and her novel The Awakening, about a woman seeking personal and sexual freedom, was incredibly controversial.
Ahead of its time.
Definitely. And think about Paul Laurence Dunbar, a highly regarded African-American poet and novelist. He dealt directly with issues of race and the complexities of Black life in America, writing beautifully in both standard English and a Black dialect. His work offered profound insights into a world that was simply not well understood or even acknowledged by much of the dominant white demographic.
Giving voice and dignity through art. Were there also writers who weren't just documenting but actively criticizing the direction America was heading, maybe offering alternative visions?
Absolutely. There were some very vocal critics. Edward Bellamy's 1888 novel, Looking Backward, became a massive bestseller. It imagined a utopian socialist America in the year 2000, where cooperation replaced competition and inequality was eliminated. It was hugely influential, inspired nationalist clubs, and even influenced figures like Eugene Debs, the future socialist leader. Bellamy even predicted things like credit cards and cable entertainment.
Wow. And Henry George?
Henry George, in his book Progress and Poverty from 1879, tackled economic inequality head-on. He argued that the source of inequality was the private ownership of land, which allowed landowners to profit without producing anything. He proposed a radical solution: a single tax on land values. While it never got fully implemented, his ideas were hugely influential, and believe it or not, they actually inspired the creation of the board game Monopoly, originally designed to critique land monopolies.
That's amazing. I had no idea. And Thorstein Veblen?
Thorstein Veblen, an economist and sociologist, offered a sharp critique of the newly affluent classes in his 1899 book, The Theory of the Leisure Class. He coined the famous term conspicuous consumption.
Spending money just to show off?
He criticized a middle and upper class that seemed increasingly preoccupied with displaying their wealth through leisure and consumption, rather than focusing on productive work. He really highlighted that growing divide between the haves and the have-nots, and the changing values in this new industrial society. If we try to connect all these threads, this period, the late 19th century, it wasn't just about immense growth and technological change. It was fundamentally a profound struggle, a struggle to define what progress actually meant in a nation that was urbanizing and industrializing at breakneck speed. It really laid the groundwork, set the stage for so many of the challenges, the debates, and also the opportunities that American society is still grappling with today. Housing, inequality, immigration, the role of technology, racial justice. The roots run deep into this era.
It truly was such a dynamic, foundational time. Innovation, yes, but also intense human stories playing out against this backdrop of massive change. That drive for opportunity clashing with harsh realities, the search for community, the different ways people tried to adapt or reform. It all left such an indelible mark on American cities and society.
Absolutely. The cities we live in today were largely forged in this period.
Yeah. This deep dive into the growing pains of urbanization, it really does make you think. And maybe it raises a question for you, our listener, to consider. What echoes of these specific challenges and innovations, the constant struggle for affordable housing, the search for identity in diverse communities, the way technology continues to reshape our jobs and lives, what echoes do you recognize in the cities around you today?
That's a good question.
And maybe, how has our definition of a better future, that thing everyone's striving for back then in different ways, how has that definition continued to evolve since those formative, often turbulent years? Something to mull over until our next deep dive.